All right.
We got
Here we go.
there's almost 100 of you on already.
Welcome, everybody. Wow, what a great turnout. Welcome, welcome, everyone. So great to see everybody. I love this. Welcome. It's so great to be here and to welcome you from wherever you are in the world to be here with us today. And my name is Carrie Henley. I am the Senior Vice President of Digital and Alumni at Modern Elder Academy and your Zoom hostess for the day. So let's just connect with each other before we jump in, as we often love to do. So go down into the chat box if you can find it and let us know where are you in the world right now. And I heard a really fun one from Priya Parker. So where are you in the world? Go down, where are you? Let us know. And Priya Parker did a great one, which is, what kind of flooring is underneath you? I loved that one.
I'm floating, so I have no
Chip is
flooring.
on air. Snow, Sandy says, is underneath her.
Good. Wow.
We've got carpet and wood in the Netherlands and Canada and United States. We have Morocco is here. Oh no, Moroccan carpet.
Moroccan carpet.
Bad carpet. Nice.
It could.
Bad carpet. Santa Fe, Walnut Creek. Great to see everyone from all over. And now we got the most important question to go beyond happiness is to know where we are and what our flooring is. Welcome, everybody. So I'm going to turn it over here to Chip and Jen and give them the floor. And again, really happy to have everybody here today. If you have any tech questions, you can always text me directly.
Great. Thank you, Carrie. Hello, everybody. Got about, we're up to almost 200 people. Hi. Well, you clearly wanted to listen to Jen Lim, and let me talk for a moment about Jen Lim. So I met Jen Lim with Tony Hsieh at the TED conference in 2009, if I'm not mistaken. And we had this. So for those of you who have never been to the TED conference, which is like most of the world, you get a flavor of it because TEDx and the TED videos are so prevalent out there in the world. But the TED conference is sort of like a place where, you know, people are, you by the end of 4 days there, you have TED head, which means your brain is like full and you're sort of meeting all these interesting people, and it's sort of crazy. But I had this meal or drinks. I don't even remember what it was. I just remembered it was me and Tony and Jen, the three of us having a deep, intimate conversation. I think I shocked Tony, maybe even Jen with some of my questions, because I wanted to really get to know them very quickly and well. And I did. And I just have loved 12 years of becoming close friends with Jen. When Tony's book, Delivering Happiness, came out in 2010, so maybe the year after we met at TED, it became an international bestseller, and there was an organization called Delivering Happiness, because Tony's book was called Delivering Happiness, that Jen became the CEO of and has been running ever since then. And she has a new book out called Beyond Happiness. And so we're going to talk about what is happiness, personally as well as in our work. What is beyond happiness? And then, you know, we'll talk a little bit about our friend Tony, who is no longer living with us, unfortunately. He was the CEO, for those of you who don't know him, he was the CEO, very successful CEO of Zappos, but he was successful in all kinds of other ways, and basically a rule breaker in all kinds of ways. And I've also seen, speaking of rule breaking, both Jen and Tony out at Burning Man a few times. So Jen, welcome to our community.
Thank you, Chip. Thank you so much for having me. Honored to be here. And it's really awesome to see so many people. I had to give a shout out to Sacramento, California, because that's my hometown. Whoop, whoop.
What high school? What high school?
Oh, we moved I ended up at San Dimas High School if anyone's familiar with Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, that was my high school in San Dimas.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
So, first of all, give us a little, I tried to give a little bio, but why don't you just embellish it a little bit further, especially the relationship with Tony, Zappos, and what is Delivering Happiness, the organization?
Sure. Yeah, so just a little bit of backstory. Prior to Delivering Happiness, which was launched as a book and then the organization, as you said, in 2010, I was one of those .com babies. So I had graduated from UC Berkeley, got spit out and sent to the world with a degree in Asian American Studies, which freaked out my parents because they said, how the hell are you gonna get a job? And they were right for a while until the internet was born. And so I landed in Silicon Valley and money, title, status was flowing, but as everyone knows, .com busted and I lost it pretty much overnight. And that really pushed me to a different place of what am I doing? For 3 reasons. I got laid off, so I felt like kind of a failure because I was chasing the money, title, status. 9/11 happened, and my dad was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. So that happened within a year. And that really forced me to ask those questions like, what am I doing? What is this all for? Being all existential as we are. So that's when I became an independent consultant. I just wanted to do what I never wanted to get fired again. That's one thing for sure. But that's when I met Tony in 99. It was actually on his birthday, which is coming up in 11 days. And we just, first off, to be truthful, I did not like him the first time I met him, but it's a very bad impression because it was the .com glory days and it was his birthday and he was having this huge party and the DJ's like, oh, the ladies in the house, come give, Tony a kiss. And I'm like, oh, that's, typical. But the second time, and then that's when I saw the real Tony and, super generous, very introverted, and we connected. So that's when he actually, right around the time he became CEO of Zappos. And that's when I became a consultant at Zappos. And as it grew, the company grew, I grew with it and eventually worked on culture and the culture book and just kind of saw it grow from a tiny little startup to, it's like one of your friends in high school that has a little brother or sibling and you're like, oh, you're so cute. And then all of a sudden you're like, how did you get so big? And that was Zappos. And then 2010 came about and the book deal came, offered to Tony, and he asked if I wanted to be a part of it. And I said, yeah, of course, why not? Sounds cool. Another project to check off the list of things to do. But lo and behold, as you said, there was quite a bit of demand for happiness in the world. And so we decided to make it evolve into a company and basically been running it since. And the whole goal was to make sure people knew that it wasn't, rainbows and unicorn happiness that made Zappos successful. It was actually scientific happiness that brought it to a more profitable place, got eventually acquired by Amazon. And I wanted to prove, because people were like, oh, that was cool. That's cool for Zappos, but it'll never happen for me. And that's what I wanted to prove wrong. So since then, we've been around the world. Half of our clients have been international, which is really cool, using these principles of scientific happiness for more productivity, engagement, and essentially a more sustainable company.
So talk a little bit more about some of the science behind happiness, because Tony's an egghead and you are too. So you are, who are the people that you most admire who are studying happiness, and what have they been able to show with their studies?
Yeah, I would say so. Marty Seligman is known to be the godfather of positive psychology. And so, that was decades ago. And since then, there's been different people that have kind of picked up, because it initially was very academic and, rightfully so, because otherwise it wouldn't be a science and wouldn't be research and people would kind of like cast it off as something just, fluffy. But since then, I really appreciated the work of Sean Aker, Adam Grant, in his own way of organizational design, but he's such a positive guy, so they kind of put him in there. But what I loved about that body of work is how we're taking, these academic concepts, but making it practical. And initially, I think Marty was focused more on the individual person and life, which is great. But we really wanted to transcribe it and translate it into the organizational setting. Like, how do you actually apply this to companies so that people can be happier too at work? Knowing, I think the latest stat was, 87% of the world's workforce are disengaged from their work every day. So that to me was just mind blowing, and that was kind of part of the cause to fix that.
So what if you were to just maybe distill down 3 suggestions to any company to create a more happy filled workplace, what might those be?
Totally. So we base it on, again, what the science has said of like what happiness means. And so what we've seen over time is that there's different forms of happiness. There's pleasure, it's just like grabbing a drink with friends, binging on Netflix. And then there's purpose. And there's this, basically the level of sustainable happiness that describes each of these points or types of happiness. And so the most sustainable form of happiness, being purpose, is where we focus on. Because when we as individuals and for companies actually have something that we're doing that's greater than ourselves, being a part of something that's greater than ourselves, and for a company doing more than just making money, that's the most sustainable form of happiness. So that's where we focus on. Number one, to your question, is to really define, or if you already have one, revisit what's your purpose? What's your purpose statement that's beyond making money? And then, and for your individual, that's beyond just being within your own world. And then establishing values. So that would be the biggest step first, is revisit or refine, or actually just define your purpose and your values, and specifically behaviors out of that. Because as we've seen in the past, there's tons of companies now. I mean, back in the day, it was more rare to see purpose and values. Now there's no company that really exists without them. But how do you actually make them live on a day-to-day basis? Like the most notorious value that we've seen broken was not too long ago, if you think about it, but Enron. I think Enron's number one value was integrity. So it was just a really blatant reminder. And since then we see, different value breakers of, Wells Fargo doing its thing, Volkswagen, Uber, etc. And we get a sense of what that means when companies aren't purpose driven or aren't values driven, especially from a behavioral sense. So that'd be number one. The next thing I would do is, this is what we do with our clients, is just take a snapshot of where the company is with your teams. And you can use existing surveys. The worst thing you can do with engagement surveys is to say, hey, company, let's do this, and then leave it on the shelf, because they poured their heart out, but nothing's being done with it. So I would say take that body of data, quantitative and qualitative, understand what's going well to celebrate it, and then understand what's not going well to actually highlight these are the top 2-3 things in our team, or top 2-3 things in our organization that we will now focus on. And using science of happiness, the other levers besides purpose and values are a sense of autonomy or control, basically flexibility and freedom, making sure people feel trusted that they can make the decisions on their own because they're there for a good reason. The second one is progress. Make sure people feel a sense that they're getting somewhere, they're learning, they're developing, or their project is getting to the eventual goal. And the third thing is connectedness. And this one, as we've seen, especially during the pandemic, is so huge. Like what we mean by connectedness, though, is not just having those happy hour drinks or your annual holiday party. It's actually getting to know each other in a more meaningful, fundamental way. And that's why the purpose and values are so important, is because we're defining it not just for the organization, but for people too. So to provide that sort of space and environment where people can truly authentically feel they're expressing their own personal purpose and values. And then what we do is ladder it up to that of the company. That's why they're showing up, not just for the paycheck, showing up for something more meaningful.
Let's talk thank you. You've got a damn girlfriend. I mean, you've been doing this a while.
11 years.
You've been doing this a while. I want to take us back for a minute. I met you at the TED conference in 2009, which was probably like February or March. And then in April of 2009, I went to Bhutan. And on a trip as a CEO of a company, to study the gross national happiness index. So Bhutan was the first country in the world to actually create a gross national happiness index. It was a 17-year-old king of Bhutan who in the 1970s said, you know, why is GNP, gross national product, important? Why isn't GNH, what's so important, gross national happiness? So I was fascinated by that. And I went to study there for 10 days to understand how they measure happiness. And I came back, I ended up giving a TED talk the following year on the big TED stage, which actually maybe Carrie can put that in the chat notes, if possible. What I learned from that, and I want to just get your perspective, is happiness equals wanting what you have, in other words, gratitude, divided by having what you want, gratification. So what does that mean? It basically means, now success can be all about gratification. Like, I got to go gratify, you know, and the pursuit of happiness, you know, the word pursuit in some dictionary says to chase with hostility. Do we chase happiness with hostility? Yes, at the mall in a normal Christmas year, maybe. But the bottom line is, I'm curious to get your perspective on both personally and sort of in the professional realm, the idea that happiness is something that people often are pursuing to try to get a gratification of it, which is the pleasure side of it, maybe, but they're not actually spending enough time really feeling the gratitude of what we've accomplished or what is going on in my life today, or etc. Could you maybe just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. And I love how you keep on bringing up the first time we met, by the way. Of all the TED moments of all these years, that was still one of my highlights. So thank you for probing with your questions. Yeah, so you know what's interesting is that that's one definition of pursuit, but when our founding fathers of the US, at least for our country, when they said pursuit of happiness, their intention wasn't to use the definition of chasing. It was actually, their intention was the other definition, I guess, that exists back then in this context, is that it was the right to it and the state of being happiness. So I think that was more well-intended and more true to what we as, you know, DH, as when you and I talk about happiness and when we think about it in a more journey perspective, instead of that constant, this is the destination, we're getting there. I mean, there's all these studies that we now know, it's like, it's not success that brings you happiness, however you define success. It's actually happiness that brings you more success. And that's the reason why, if you can actually be authentic to who you are and define that happiness, that's how you define your own success. So being able to see it that way versus this chase or pursuit, I think has been really helpful because, and I love your equations, all the equations you always bring in, always boils it down so well. It is like searching and going for, and, you know, having those aspirations of what we can do to be happy. But it becomes this endless cycle, you know, whenever I get this job or whenever I get this raise or whenever I buy this house, and then it's like, what's next? And what we do forget is, yes, we should celebrate that. Of course, these are achievements that are important for our lives. It's important for our progress. But it's, you know, part and parcel in a balance and harmony with knowing who we are and knowing what we are grateful for, what we do have versus what we don't have. But you said it more eloquently.
Beautiful. No, that was great. Well, I've always been interested in this topic, partly, you know, when I started a boutique hotel company and named it, you know, I started it in my mid-20s and they named it Joie de Vivre, which means joy of life in French. You know, not too many people in the United States call their company Joie de Vivre, which is an emotion, to be in joy. I love looking at joy versus happiness. Joy, I don't want to say versus, but joy and happiness, because they're sort of different emotions in some ways. And it feels like joy. So J.D. Salinger, who wrote Catcher in the Rye, said, happiness is a solid and joy is a liquid. And I think what he meant by that was happiness is often something that you're striving for and something that is circumstantial of what's happening in your life. And you can feel like I've got a happy life. I like how it's all sort of feeling. And then joy might be, we don't say we're overflowing with happiness. We say we're overflowing with joy because it's actually coming from the inside. So if happiness is a solid, joy is a liquid, it's sort of more intangible. It's more coming from the inside. So I think it's just an interesting juxtaposition to consider. Any thoughts on joy versus happiness and happiness?
No, I think it's perfectly appropriate and needed to define it, because sometimes when you talk to people that are big proponents of joy, the things they say about what makes joy, I agree with your definition, but sometimes they actually say exactly what I said about happiness. It's about having that purpose. It is about having those pleasures, but knowing who you are. So that's why I think there's a huge overlap. And what I think you're bringing up is a really perfect case in point of it. What matters most is how we define it for ourselves. So, just like when, in the 80s, when we heard sustainability, or 90s, it's like, what does that mean? Like, what is sustainable? It's kind of that, like, what's the context of what we're talking about? Because some people will consider joy not as important or whatever. Not to say that's the case.
Well, I think another thing that's interesting, and the social science in this is fascinating, and then we're going to move on to beyond happiness, and then in a moment or so, we're going to get to questions in a few moments. So there's a bunch of research that has shown that if you asked people if you could earn $50,000, but you were making less money, you're making more money than 80% of the people around you, versus someone making $150,000 and you were making less than 80% of the people around you. So $50,000, you're making more than 80% of the people around you. So relatively speaking, you're doing well. $150,000 and you're making 20, you're in the 20th percentile. 80% of the people are making more than you. Which would you prefer? And people consistently choose the first one. And they say, I would choose less money if it's relationally or comparing myself, I'm doing better than the people around me. Isn't that fascinating, right? It just sort of says that a lot of our way of looking at happiness in our lives is in context and in comparison.
Right. Yeah, it is fascinating. It's partially, I think, it's the grass is greener effect.
Yeah.
That is such a common innate human trait of all of us. That's been really augmented during COVID, I would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so much that's what intrigues this to me, at least, of all this topic, is that it's so relative, it's so contextual, and until we as individuals can really ground ourselves, then the context doesn't move as violently if the world is chaotic, or it doesn't move because it doesn't move because we know who we are. At least we're putting a stand in our authentic purpose and values in ourselves. So then that grass is greener doesn't get that green anymore, knowing there's the other side of it, that we're usually in where we're supposed to be.
Oh, I love that. It's sort of like the ballast in a ship, or in a boat. If you're sailing and your ballast isn't deep enough into the water, you might tip over too much. So talk about the new book, Beyond Happiness, and how is that the evolution from delivering happiness?
Yeah, thank you for saying it's evolution, because it definitely wasn't meant to be like a part two kind of thing. I essentially started writing it at the beginning of 2020, and the outline for the book was very, very structured around the last 10 years of delivering happiness and sharing all the stats and stories of all these successful companies, organizations, governments, hospitals, et cetera, and what they did to be able to implement the frameworks that we put out there. But then, of course, 2020 happened, And that the outline did not make sense anymore. It was just like, this is too small. So with every headline, as you can probably imagine, COVID, recession, social unrest, and then ultimately for me, and I'm sure everyone on this call had one, if not many moments of a sense of loss. So for me, losing Tony a year ago now, or loss or grief or pain. I mean, everyone in the world experienced it in some way. So for me, that was why I went towards the notion of beyond happiness, because the perception of happiness, ask anyone on this call, like, it's very subjective. What's your definition? But I really wanted to open up the conversation to what might be beyond that, knowing that our happiness moments aren't really necessarily defined by all our highs. It's actually by understanding our lows and being able to understand what those pain points are, what grief is like. How do you sit with it? Like, one thing that helped me during that time was Rumi's quote, which is, the cure for pain is in the pain. And for me, as an egghead, as you said, I really wanted to understand what that means and question myself and my beliefs of what happiness is. So that's why I really wanted to broaden that discussion of what that means to be truly fulfilled. If you're not in a joyful state, what does that mean to just feel full? That you're actually living these different emotions, the gamut of our highs and lows in a peaceful way. So yeah, I mean, I really wanted to touch upon just how this feeling of loss, and it comes in so many different forms, because before I thought it was about, because I lost my dad 18 years ago, and that was one thing. And then with this, Tony being so much younger, and then knowing that there's all these different forms of grief and loss. It could be a spouse, a partner, it could be, the earth, environment, these things that are really intrinsic with us. It goes historically as to who we are as human beings. So that's why I wanted to go beyond happiness and really open up the space to have that discussion on what that means today.
If you could, so just so everybody knows, we didn't script any of this. So we're just, Jen has been open to me just saying whatever comes to my mind. So I'm going to ask you a question that's a little vulnerable. If you could say anything to Tony now, what would you say to him?
Oh, wow. That's why I love you, Chip.
I love you too, Jen.
This reminds me of our first conversation at TED. Wow. I would say that, Tony, I hope you can rest. I hope you're resting. I hope you're at peace, because you did everything you could, and in amazing ways. And what a legacy you left. But I wish we could have had more of these conversations of what was beyond, what is our shadow sides, what's our weaknesses, what's our traumas. I wish we could have spoke about that more.
Wow. That was so beautiful. Thank you, Jen. That was, oh yeah, it's hard.
The question, Chip.
It is so hard, to have loss in our lives when it's unexpected. When it's expected, you have time to prepare for it. Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the community. So if people have questions in the community, go ahead and use go down to reactions at the bottom, and you can raise your hand. That's the best way to do it. Chat is not the best way to do it, because there's so much in the chat. And if you're going to ask a question to either me or Jen, or to both of us, just make sure your video's on, because that's who we will give priority to, is people who have their videos on. All right, so to Jen, last question. Any revelations. You write a book and the process with your damn publisher takes forever. And then by the time the book comes out, oh my gosh, I have some new thoughts, which is why you have, further printings in the future where you can put the new thoughts. But what's a revelation or a new thought you have that might not even be in the book, but that, you wish was in the book, or it could be in the next version of the book?
Chip, and your good questions.
They're tough. Yeah, my good questions, they're not meant to be tough. They're just meant to be.
No, they're great.
Force a little bit of depth of introspection.
Yeah, that's why I love our conversations. Well, I guess just to back up a little bit, it was, the title Beyond Happiness didn't really come to me until I had to, it was even after I was sent in the manuscript. I was struggling with it so much. So I think maybe that's kind of like indicator of what you're saying right now. Like there's something that's it's still raw form. And you know how the book writing process goes. It's like everything you set out to do doesn't necessarily happen. So like I had no idea after I submitted the manuscript that the pandemic would still be going, and it would still be going through its own sort of phases and evolutions of what that means to society, what that means to businesses, what that means to families. So I think there would be something in that, because, for example, I've been talking to from CEOs to frontliners. They've been asking, what does even happiness mean anymore? Like, I'm not sure how to even define it anymore. Like they're telling me, like, what do you think? And so I think there's something in that there's a new, as we were saying earlier, a new context to what happiness is. And I think we're still in this phase of defining it for ourselves, and to bring it to more of the great resignation, all that stuff. Like, I also think that means there's a great awareness. And I think that would be the next, so to speak, chapter of, because I really focused on the business and I really focused on organizational change, but I think there's something that, and I did talk a lot about start with the me of being authentic, but I think there's something about that piece that's still writing itself out.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes so much sense. So let's see, Carrie, how are we doing on hands up?
Yeah, I can read a couple questions for you guys. Some folks may not have been able to turn on their camera. So Jen, question of how can companies address mental health in the workplace? Depression, anxiety, diagnosed mental conditions. Is it possible to address, express, and accept the mental health of a person in the workplace without a huge liability? Great question.
Yeah. That's a very good question. And I'd actually love to hear what you think too, Chip. So it's such, I'm an optorealist, and the fact that we can talk about mental health in the workplace as freely as we do these days versus just a year ago, let alone 2 and 3. Like Simone Biles, her workplace was on the Olympics, stage, and she said, no, I'm not going to do it. And we had a lot, people that are divided from that. So what I would say to that, and there's a lot of companies that are approaching it from one way of, we'll get everyone a Calm app. We're good. We'll get everyone Headspace, we're good. And that's just like part one, right? It's like, yeah, okay, that's a nice benefit, nice perk, but what do you do about it? So I think the more as leaders can introduce and create the environment, create a safe space, create psychological safety to have these conversations. And something I say is like, we don't have to be the mirror as a leader, but we don't have to be the mechanic, we can be the mirror. So basically the mirror is asking these questions. Hey, how are you today? As simple as that. There's a great story I had at one of my clients, Starbucks. Someone was having a terrible day. Everyone didn't know what was going on. They were kind of like, there's always one person in the meeting room just like, what's going, this person does not belong here. leaves the meeting room. Another stranger, don't really know her that well, pulls her aside, takes her into the other conference room and says, how are you? Or yeah, how are you? And that was it. And the woman just broke down and she's like, I'm not well because I just got that 3 o'clock call last night and my favorite uncle just passed away. So that simplicity of how I think if we can create the cultures, create the environments where people can actually have these conversations without the taboo and know that there's professionals that, hopefully more than the Calm app that we can provide for them, then I think it's something that we can do without a huge liability.
Beautiful. I would just amplify by saying you mentioned the term psychological safety, and I just want to give a little geeky fact here. So when Google studied all of their teams globally, it was a project called Project Aristotle. They found that the number one indicator of effective teams was how much psychological safety was there on the team. And psychological safety speaks to the idea of people feeling safe, comfortable, diverse voices being able to be elevated, introverted voices being able to be elevated, the ability to actually have conflict, but then from the conflict come to alignment. So I would just say, to answer the question, my perspective on the question is, you study psychological safety. It's a relatively new concept, maybe the last 10 years or so, but it's gotten such both, I think, academic kudos for it, as well as what we're seeing in the workplace. So let's go to Janine. Welcome, Janine. Let's unmute you and feel free to ask the question.
Okay, good morning. Thank you both for your time and your wisdom that you're sharing. So the question I would ask Jen is, so I'm working with a couple different teams, one in healthcare at a large academic research hospital, and another helping a nonprofit helping incarcerated folks re-enter into the community, and their leadership teams are struggling, right? With they don't have maybe the level of trust, they don't have that ability to do the conflict piece well. So I'm just wondering, from your work, the Beyond Happiness work with the org structure, org design teams lens, any advice that you would offer? And I'm going to get the book after I get off the call today, but any advice that if you were stepping into a team that was in such a state, where might you start? How might you help them?
Yeah, what it sounds like, what would be most probably the lowest lift for biggest impact is what we're always going for, like, so you can see actionable results, is we would do an alignment session, essentially, and get the leadership team together and get beyond just like the business issues or organizational issues, but actually get a sense of alignment or disalignment most of the time, if you're having these issues in the first place, of not just, not just the business issues, but them as people. And essentially how we talk to that is through the purpose and values exercises that we do. And we get to the core of who they are as individuals before aligning them together. So I think when those, kind of tensions happen, it's when people aren't communicating, or they're talking or not listening, that kind of thing. And they're not coming from a shared ground, shared foundation. So when you break open that discord and tension and bring them together as human beings and reminders of they each have a purpose, then you actually see pretty miraculous results, because you can align their purpose to that of the organization. And these are obviously very purposeful organizations, so that part's easy. But what happens is that they actually see it visually and they feel it like, oh, wow, we're actually more aligned than we thought.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Let's go to
Thanks for the
Sue.
question.
Thank you, Janine. Sue, it's good to see you here.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
I can't got my questions prepared because that's my, if anybody was in my MEA cohort, you all know I'm a little awkward at coming up and, publicly.
Feel free to ask it.
Okay, feel free to ask it. Okay, here's my curious questions for Jen, delivering happiness. Okay, what I'm curious about is in the delivering happiness training for new DH consultants, I think you call them. I was wondering, does DH follow a specific format or certain guidelines that you have when onboarding and training new DH consultants?
Short answer is yes. It's a
Cool.
a program that we have for kind of like train the trainer. So we're always training our new trainers coming in so that there's consistency in our, I keep on saying purpose and values, but basically the culture side, while also knowing that what we do keeps on changing over time too. So yes,
Great.
the program.
Yeah, and if I could ask a second question, for delivering happiness, when you are going through the DH consultant hiring process, are there specific experiences, past experiences, skills, or prerequisites that DH requires of, when they?
Yeah, no, the short answer is no. There's no specific requirements. I always call our team a motley crew because I don't think if there was no entity called Delivering Happiness, I don't think they would ever meet. They wouldn't hang out the same bar, or they wouldn't hang out the same restaurant or library, whatever it is. But because there's such a shared sense of purpose and values, that's why they want to join. And then, I mean, I just really believe, I mean, of course, when you have a consulting background, that's great. Of course, when you have organizational design background, great. Psychology, psychology, that'd be great. But I always think there's something really interesting to be learned from across fields, across industries, across everything.
Great.
Very interesting.
Thank you for your questions, Sue. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, Sue.
Likewise, thank you.
Let's go to Deborah.
Hi, thank you so much for your work. I'm loving it. I wanted to ask you if happiness is contagious, as many has quoted.
Oh, is that the question?
It is.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
You agree that if happiness is contagious and grows in circles, you can have like that are very happy as Denmark or Finland. I'm not sure about which countries around there are the most happiness countries in the world. But it makes if happiness is contagious. Yeah,
I love it. And I would also love to hear, Chip, your response as well. So it isn't just a saying, it actually is true that it's been proven neuroscientifically, it's been proven physiologically, like just a stranger smiling to another person triggers the endorphins and hormones within the other person of serotonin or dopamine, depending like how, if it's a stranger, or if it's a loved one, or a partner or spouse or brother, sister, that kind of thing. So it actually shows that it physically and physiologically is contagious. If you're around people that are happier, you tend to be happier too. I also think that happens in organizational settings too, and therefore communities, because when you see a group of people or a community or a team that's naturally showing that they're happier and more productive and more engaged, these are all reasons why they're probably happier. Most people want to be part of that band, they want to join that band or join that membership club or whatever it is that they want to be a part of it. And I think that's why it's so great what Chip is doing and what you're all a part of, this MEA community. It's just being able to share that sense of like, what's within you already is, and I can already tell like this is generally a happy group of people. It is contagious, and it kind of just augments each other as you interact. Chip?
I would just add that I think it's also proven that all emotions are contagious, not just happiness. So anxiety is contagious, anger is contagious, So I wrote a book, actually 2 years after Tony's book came out, I wrote a book called Emotional Equations. And I wrote it because we're not taught how to have emotions in business school for sure, but also not in elementary school. You know, the teacher of our emotions are really our parents, or, you know, often the adult figures in our life, and sometimes our friends, and they weren't necessarily the best teachers. And so learning to be more emotionally fluent is important, because actually the more senior you are in an organization, the more contagious your emotions. And why that's relevant is, wow, gosh, you know, when you're a senior leader in an organization, you're not the thermostat. You're not the thermometer, you're the thermostat. You set the climate, control in the room with how you show up. And I learned that the hard way when I went through a pretty dark period of my life between 2008 and 2010, about the time I met Jen. And I just knew I needed to no longer, you know, run the company I was running. And because I was unhappy, and my unhappiness, I think, was affecting, you know, during the Great Recession, other people. So yes, all emotions are contagious. So that's why we need to understand what's coming through us. Thank you, Deborah. Let's go to Dana or Dana. Remind me, so Dana and Dana, you've been here in Baja. Is it Dana or is it Dana? Dana. It's Dana.
It's Dana. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought, because there's somebody else in my life who I've seen more recently than I've seen you, and for her it's Dana. So hi, Dana. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. Yes, I was there for your entrepreneurship mastery weekend.
Which, by the way, just Carrie's gonna, like, don't tell Deborah I said this, because it's not on the website yet. But the workshop you were there for, we are going to bring it back, and it's going to be the end of February, because Dr. Bill Thomas, who we love, is not going to be able to join us, and his workshop's going to have to move to 2023. So yes, so good timing. What's your question?
So fantastic. By the way, I love the book. Almost every page is dog-eared. I'm starting a business on my own. I have consulting, corporate, and psychology background. My biggest question is, organizations are so survival focused now, and I've learned cultural change within organizations is, you know, riding a big ship. Where can the solopreneur really make an impact? For instance, if we want to lead this work into organizations, how do we open these conversations and create an impact? Is it at the individual level? Like I have a lot of awareness training background. Do I go in at an individual level? Do I go in with a certain conversation, helping them analyze their metrics? I'm wondering what you would advise for people like me who really want to be part of this movement.
First of all, thanks for getting the book.
I love
appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, I think this is going to be a typical consulting answer. It all depends. But I think what would be good, behoove you on your, you know, what is it that the value that you're bringing? And I'm sure there's so many different elements of it, but I think the point of entry would depend on, you know, what is that special, is it Dana, right? We figured that it's Dana, not okay. The Dana sauce that no one else is bringing to the table. And so I would try to kind of conceive that first, like what is, you know, product or service, because it's a more boring way to say it, but what makes it unique? I have an acronym, what makes it best, unique, or first? What makes it buff? And then I would then think about, you know, would it be at the executive level? So it's like exec coaching type stuff, or would it be at a team level, which I think is actually growing in demand right now? How do we create more engaged, productive, happier, and therefore more, productive and profitable teams? So that could be the team level too. Or it could just be at, it just sounds from a solopreneur perspective, like the C-level, big impact, because you know everyone's going to listen. Again, the thermometer and thermostat thing. Team level, that provides a big sense of accomplishment and progress too, because you're impacting whatever project in or function they're in. So that's where I would guess I would start. Individual level always is going to be a baseline as the case, but if you're talking about scaling impact, that's what I would think about.
Right. Thank you.
Great. Good to
Thank
see you,
you.
Dana. Carrie, any questions in the
Yeah,
chat?
there was some great, you guys are killing it with the chat. So thank you. One I got in privately from Ralph that I loved. This is tying in very much to the world Chip we've been working with. Transitions. So the question is, how do you stay happy when in Chip's lingo, you're in a great midlife edit or you're in a messy middle where I know what I no longer want in my career, but I don't know where I want to go in my career. So those folks who are in that place, and I don't know what is next, and I'm struggling in that space. So how do you go beyond happiness when you're at that spot in life? So I'll let you both take that one.
I'm gonna start that one, then I'm gonna give Jen a moment to think about it. Well, you take Carrie's course. Carrie leads our MEA online course, which the next one starts at the end of February on transitions. So you can find it on the Modern Elder Academy website. And really the thing to know when it comes to transitions, that there's 3 stages to a transition. There's the ending of something, there's the messy middle or the liminal stage of being on the threshold, and then there's the beginning of something new. Once you actually understand the anatomy of a transition, and Carrie and Jeff's beautiful essay on the anatomy of a transition is so well worth reading. Once you understand that, it's so much easier to understand where you are and how you get through it. So I think that's a big piece of it. Our workshop this week in Baja is also on transitions. In fact, they are in the classroom right now with Jeff and Christine, my co-founders. So yeah, I would just say that. There's also a great book, Life is in the Transitions, by one of our faculty members on MEA Online, Bruce Feiler. It was a New York Times bestseller the summer of 2020. Jen.
I love this whole transition course you got going. It's great. And it's so timely. Yeah, the way I would just build on that in the sense that I think what my equivalent is I talk about adapting a lot. And so I think one of the things I wanted to focus in the book was to, like, how do you adapt? Because we have to be adaptable now. It's almost like a requirement, whether we're a human being or a company. So I'm going to build and bring it back to what I mentioned earlier, in addition to what Chip just said, is to be able to ground yourself first before going through that transition. It's like, then you'll have a better sense of how you want to transition, and knowing that it's all about testing too. Because once you ground yourself, then you have the more freedom and capability and reassurance and security that you can test. What is this? What are the new opportunities that I want to explore? What do I want to be curious about? But that would be my only build to that.
Great, thank you. Carrie, any other questions? And we've got about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes left. I love Zia just threw in there that it's true. People make the mistake of resisting a transition or calling it unhappy. So I do love that. I'm sure you hear that a lot of people mislabeling happiness or unhappiness for something else.
Lori Harrison just asked, where are we in Baja?
Back up. So Deborah, I'll bring you back on here. And this is your last chance, guys. If you want to speak to Jen or Chip, throw your hand up. We'll take 1 or 2 more.
And Lori Harrison, we are an hour north of you. You're in Cabo. We're up in Pescadero. So just south of Todos Santos. Come visit sometime, or come to a workshop, even better. Deborah.
Sorry, I would like to know, what would you say to a person who is completely unhappy?
Your questions are short and sweet.
They are good. And they're really good, actually. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, you want to take it first? I can.
Okay, I'll take it first. I'll say, do you want to be unhappy? I think I want to be careful here because, when it comes to depression and psychological conditions that can be incredibly debilitating, people deserve resources beyond reading a book, whether it's therapy, etc., or even medication. But the reality is people can go through a concentration camp and come on the other side. Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, is a fascinating study in how can you create meaning and therefore potentially even happiness in the worst of conditions. So I don't believe that happiness is only circumstantial. I think that it is relevant, but I think so much of it has to do with the mindset you take toward life. Jen?
Yeah, I guess there's different angles to that. Excuse me for a second.
No problem.
Sorry, thank you. I totally agree with your response, Chip. So I'll come from a different approach if I was having a conversation with someone. I think in the end, especially right now, all people really want is to be heard, understood, and loved. And if they're labeling themselves as unhappy, or if we perceive them to be unhappy, that's less of the point, I guess. I guess for me, it's about what this person is exuding that kind of energy. It's just kind of like, hey, what's up? You know, what's going on? And just by hearing that person out, I think it could help understand if there's something that could be done, or, you know, to Chip's point, it's, you know, it's a very fine line between depression and, you know, other conditions that are going on that are really serious. But yeah, I mean, I always believe you can't twist anyone's arm to be happy, but we can provide the conditions for them to be, and then it becomes more of their choice.
And you can kick them in the knee to make them unhappy. But I think I would just say one last thought on that is to answer the question more directly. If someone said they're just unhappy and perennially unhappy, the two pieces of advice I would give them, I'd go back to the Bhutan equation. Happiness equals wanting what you have, gratitude, divided by having what you want, gratification. How are you living a life full of gratitude? Now that sounds, you know, when someone's unhappy, that's often the last thing they want to hear, but there's a lot of evidence that it works. The second thing I would say to them is, how are you in service to the world? What are you doing in service right now? How are you serving the world beyond yourself? And I say that not because I'm suggesting they're selfish. I'm saying that because, quite frankly, when you are in service, it's a sneaky way to get back to happiness. Especially if you're in service doing something you really love. Okay, we have, wow, we have this beautiful Turkish name,
And super
if I'm not
quick.
mistaken,
I'll
and
bring
it's
you
going to be
up.
very quick.
Yeah.
Long name, short question.
Okay, Kuzey Han.
Kuzey
So
Han.
the short one is Kuzey. The question first, both of you makes me happy. Thank you very much. And my question, what makes you happy? Both of you.
Jen, I'll let you go first.
I guess the more life has been getting complicated, I just go back to the basics of people and nature. And that's what I've been trying to surround myself with, especially in this last couple of years. So people and nature.
And dogs. My dog Jamie makes me happy. And I'm particularly happy when I know that I'm having an impact. So that makes me happy as well. Beautiful question. Thank you all. Jen, thank you for joining us in our community. We had more people than I expected, which is a sign that the topic and you, Jen, were a magnet. And thank you, Carrie Henley, for always being our digital diva. And thanks to all of you in the community. It is a joy. Let's remember social wellness. Illness starts with the letter I, wellness starts with the letters we. You know, social wellness is a thing. We actually, in COVID times especially, knowing that our wellness in our life is not just what we're eating, how much we're sleeping, and how much we're working out. It is who are we spending our time with, and how are those people having a contagion effect on our lives in a positive way. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy
Thank you,
holidays.
Chip.
Take good care. We'll send
Thank
you the
you, Jen.
recording.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you,
Chip.
Carrie.
Bye, everyone.